Hello everybody and welcome back to the United Stand. Where does Ruben Amorim's future lie? We have a great interview to bring you with transfer expert and journalist Ben Jacobs. Ben, thank you so much for joining us once again.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I am good, personally. In footballing terms, not great to be honest with you. One game a week, and that one game I'm watching, it's a struggle to be honest with you, Ben. But you know, we keep moving forward. And how do we get Manchester United back to their best? Does it involve keeping Amorim? Does it involve potentially a new manager? We're here to talk about it, aren't we?
Yeah, and I think it's going to be really interesting because if they don't get a result against Sunderland, you've got an international break. If they do, it may be a stay of execution. But looking at the fixtures after the international break, Liverpool, always a big game in a way. Brighton, they've done okay on the road. They beat Chelsea, remember, recently. Away at Nottingham Forest, away at Tottenham, home to Everton, who are in form as well. People sort of speak about the festive fixtures, but actually the pre-festive fixtures, as we head towards that early December period, they're pretty tricky on paper. So Ruben Amorim, I think, doesn't have that many games to turn things around, even though the official club line from sources is that he remains backed.
As a Manchester United fan, start of the season, it was put out there that Manchester United, on paper, have the most difficult fixture start to the season. But then I'm looking at it, and I'm not even joking with you. Every single game that comes up, I think that's a tough game. That's a difficult game. Like, Sunderland have just been promoted. I'm very, very worried about playing them. Even Burnley was a struggle to get through at Old Trafford. They've just been promoted. There's no easy game in the Premier League. And when the form is the way of Manchester United's, every game coming at you, you're fearful of it. And it's unfortunate that this is where the fan base is at. I mean, in terms of Ruben Amorim, I think the majority of the fan base have always wanted every single manager to work. They don't want to keep sacking and replacing managers. But you just touched on it a little bit then. But how far off do you think he is, INEOS kind of coming together and thinking, you know, does this need a change immediately?
Yeah, we should be respectful of the club position, which is they want it to work with Ruben Amorim and they're backing him. But I'm not so sure, despite the fact that I respect other reports, that it's as clear-cut as he'll get a full season. I think more likely, from speaking to people in and around the club, he'll get 38 Premier League games split across 2 seasons, and then they'll use that somewhat as a yardstick, coupled with simply summer to now. And that's the challenge with this, that on the one hand, there's an inclination to agree with Amorim that it was always difficult to come in midway through last season, to write off last season and to say you've been backed in the pre-season and then look at the first 10 or so games of this season. And like any big club, if there's no progress, a manager's under threat. And yet, on the other hand, if you take the entire tenure, you'd still expect to see some progress last season, some kind of chemistry, some acknowledgement from the players that have been there since day one under Ruben Amorim that they can get used to this system. And with Manchester United, it's basically a case of 1 step forwards, 2 steps back, which is probably why that guy hasn't been able to get his hair cut, because they're nowhere close to winning those 5 straight games. So I think there's 2 considerations here. The first is when Ruben Amorim hits those 38 Premier League games over the course of 2 seasons, can they look at those metrics and judge him? And they're obviously not in his favour. And then the other aspect is if you do just try and ignore last season, be blind to it, draw a line under it, how much time do you get if you call the first game, which was very positive, even though they lost to Arsenal? How much time do you give a manager if you're starting at that point? And I think this is why we've had a delay on clarity and Amorim keeps getting games, because there's that feeling in the shorter term, if you ignore last season, and whether rightly or wrongly, that's one argument, that Matheus Cunha got injured, Mason Mount was out, Sané Lammens hasn't had a game yet, Benjamin Sesko needs a little bit of time, and all of that is allowing perhaps Ruben Amorim to feel that he can still reap the rewards from his first off-season with the squad. But at the moment, Manchester United this season look the same as Manchester United last season, and of course at any big club there's only so long that can continue. So my feeling is not that he is guaranteed 1 full season with a review in May, which is kind of where Enzo Maresca 2 years into the job is at. I think it's more going to be the case that as he gets towards those collective across 2 seasons, 38 Premier League games, if form hasn't turned around, then I still sense, speaking to people around the club, that Amorim could be in big trouble because that succession planning, in case they need to make a change, has already started.
Yeah, I mean, you can understand why the succession planning has started just purely based on results. As you know, me myself, I don't want to see Amorim go, but at the same time, I understand that results need to happen. I need to see performances, and I think that's probably the same situation that INEOS are in right now. Nobody wants to sack a manager, but it's at the point where you might have to, just to get results on the board. I mean, everybody who's watching as well, get your super chats in, get your opinions in. Let's put some questions to Ben. I've got a lot to ask him, but you get involved as well. And we are going to talk about potential replacements, how they would deal with a mid-season sacking. But I wanted to ask a little bit about the feeling about Ruben Amorim behind the scenes. I mean, we spoke about him not being entirely safe. I think that's quite obvious right now, and you touched upon how they're judging that, the INEOS and the board behind the scenes. But is there a little bit of a feeling that because it was the new footballing hierarchy that appointed Amorim, that maybe they need to stick with him for that bit longer just to prove themselves right? Is that something that you think comes into the equation?
Well, I think anyone running a club sensibly realises when they've made an error, or realises when they've given a manager more than enough time. And at that point, you have to make a change if it's needed, regardless of whether you're accountable as well. And make no mistake, the whole keep Ten Hag, get rid of Ten Hag, hire Ruben Amorim, give him the job immediately when Amorim wanted to wait. If they then get rid of Ruben Amorim, that will be as much on Ruben Amorim as it will be on the likes of Omar Barada or Jason Wilcox or Sir Jim Ratcliffe, because they've inputted. And this is why the Glazers have sort of stepped back, because usually we'd be speaking about the Glazers firing manager after manager after manager without changing the culture or getting rid of the debt or modernising the club. But now the Glazers are kind of responsible for that bigger picture and brand, and Jim Ratcliffe and his team have taken a more hands-on role. And of course, what that means is if they did their Ten Hag summer review only to sack him, they almost have to take the same approach with Ruben Amorim. And if time ticks away, mid-season and results don't improve, they can't use the fact that he was their choice and they want stability as a reason just to let this season run on in the same pattern as last season. Otherwise, Manchester United won't be where they need the team to be. And that is a minimum of some kind of European football. So I think the yardstick for whether Amorim stays or goes will not be about the senior hierarchy trying to back somebody that they felt would work and still feel can work. I think it's more down to the fact a certain amount of games cannot pass before you get to the point where you're actually at the midway point of the season rather than into the season. So we're saying mid-season change, but it's really early season change if we're being accurate. Once you get towards, let's call it 10 or 15 games, it will be obvious whether or not Manchester United are in and around that points tally to be challenging for some kind of European football. And if they're getting too far distant, they'll have to make a change, because this hierarchy believe the squad is good enough under any manager, Amorim or otherwise, to get some kind of European football. So that's what I mean about the next few games not just being a handful to see whether 6 gets to 10 and it's improvement or not, but when 6 gets to 10, you're pretty much at those 38 collective Premier League games over 2 seasons. And again, that's when Ruben Amorim, albeit under challenging circumstances last campaign, will have had enough Premier League and overall games, because he's also, I think, at the 50 mark as well, to start being truly judged. And that's why I still think now, between the festive period rather than during or after it, is a key stage. And I would be surprised if Amorim cannot turn results around if he is actually still in a Manchester United job, even though, again, officially club sources are saying he's backed and is going to be given time.
Do you feel as if the compensation package that he would receive if he's there for less than a year has any influence on how soon they would choose to relieve him of his position?
Not at this stage, in the sense that they've not decided to sack the manager. And if they decide to sack Amorim, you would think the logical step is to go to Amorim and play him or quote to him his own public comments saying that he would walk away without any compensation. And Manchester United would be remiss not to ask the manager whether he's prepared to stay true to his word. But what is true is that after the early November period passes, that current compensation, if it was sought after by Amorim, of 12 million reduces. So if they are going to make a change and they're thinking financially, that could be a factor. But if they're going to make a change, they have to think about what can they do as quickly as possible, if that's their decision, to turn the season around, to get the right manager in place. And at that point, I think you've got to go back to Amorim and say, didn't you say repeatedly in public that you would walk away without any compensation? So if suddenly that position, should he know that he's going, changes to, can I have 12 million? Manchester United's hierarchy may be a little bit surprised by that. So I don't think compensation will be that much of a deal breaker or decision-making factor as to when they decide to make a change, if they decide to make a change. But of course, if they do it early and Amorim is not true to his public words, then that's another cost on the books. It's another 12 million. And that's probably why Manchester United are also looking for additional revenue, including potentially going to Saudi Arabia to play a friendly or two.
Yeah, I mean, we'll definitely touch on that in terms of financial gain between having friendlies in the midweek while we've not got European football on the season. But just to kind of finish up on the feelings at the club around Amorim before we talk about new managers, I just wanted to ask if you have any insight on the players' point of view, because we had the players were fully behind Amorim, then it's most of them are, but some of them are questioning it. I mean, is there any update on how the players feel? Are they losing any belief in him? Are they frustrated with the setup? I mean, what is the feeling on that side of things?
I think, as ever, it's a very vocal dressing room full of egos and personalities, which is a great thing, by the way, when you're winning, because they all shine on the field. And then naturally, at any big club, you'll have one or two that don't fit the system or are not playing as much. Mainoo is probably the most widely reported. We know he's unhappy in football terms, but I don't think there's been any fallout with the manager. Senior leadership group are all behind Ruben Amorim. Harry Maguire, in particular, I'm told, has been very vocal in telling other players that they need to stand up and be counted, and this can be solved in the current formation or system, so it's not only on the manager. And that's the irony, isn't it, that if Oliver Glasner came in and succeeded in his system, then Ruben Amorim would be right that the system isn't the problem. It might just end up being the manager if Amorim departs. So most of the players want to turn things around. They believe that they can within this system. But there are exceptions within that dressing room, and that was the case also over the summer too. I think, ironically, I'm told, without naming names to expose particular sources, but some of the new signings in particular are the most disillusioned because the pitch that they were given tactically in football terms hasn't yet matched up to the reality. So that's quite intriguing. And as I've said many times, some of the new signings looked at the Manchester United squad, including some of the players that had gone, and thought one or two of those that have departed might also be quite conducive to their game. There was actually quite a few Manchester United players that said if there was a way back for Anthony to reintegrate, he would be a very good fit within this system and within this football club. But of course, that exit was as much on Anthony as it was on Manchester United. And then you have Bruno Fernandes, who I wouldn't call unhappy with his manager. If anything, they've got a positive relationship. He's captain of the football club, but he's unhappy with playing in that deeper role. So this is where a 4-1-4-1 formation might allow you to play Mainoo or Manuel Ugarte in a deeper role, Bruno Fernandes and one of Mbeumo or Cunha, and then the other, if it's Mbeumo, could be wide right, or alternatively, Benjamin Sesko might not start every game and Cunha can play as a number 9. Cunha can also play wide left as well. But in this current formation, to bring in the goal power and really get the new signings going, Bruno Fernandes is deeper and is obviously either not as effective or not as content in that role. So there's a lot of tactical questions to be answered. But I think the bottom line here is the players that I'm told are frustrated are more frustrated with the form, more frustrated with the underperformance, and more frustrated perhaps with their tactical role. But there's nothing personal between players and manager in terms of a major fallout. So he still has the dressing room, but there are doubts perhaps over individual roles and tactics.
Yeah, you can understand how it would be mixed at this point. I mean, you're always going to have questions when the results are that poor and the performances aren't going your way, and you're at a club like Manchester United where you're expected to win every single game. And I can kind of understand from a few, obviously I think the players, you know, the level that they're at have to be stand up and be counted for, and they should be doing better. But also when near enough every single player is either stagnated or regressed and maybe aren't in their best position, you can understand why there might be some internal frustration there. But it's good to hear that the players are trying to turn this around and are behind Amorim overall, because that's what you'd expect in terms of professionalism as well.
Yeah, and the last thing I'd say, Beth, is that the turmoil off the field has affected the overall sort of squad balance and chemistry, because if you think about the off-season, it was meant to be draw a line under it, and prior to that, hopefully getting Champions League football, but unfortunately they lost to Spurs in the Europa League final. And then you want stability, especially as a new manager, and instead it was an Arne staying, an Arne injured, an Arne going. Sene Lammens and Bayindir are both very young. In the midfield, there was a lot of talk about adding somebody in the centre of the park, deeper lying. They didn't get Baleba, and there was never that much of a realistic chance that anything would progress there. But how does that make Kobbie Mainoo feel? And then suddenly you have Bruno Fernandes dropping into a deeper role. You get two new 10s coming in who are versatile, and that's exciting. But you've still got to get that balance. If you're going to play both of them centrally, how do you enthuse Mason Mount? What do you say to Bruno Fernandes? And then again, all of the sort of outcry and in the end excitement was around a number 9, and Benjamin Sesko has a very high ceiling, but how does that impact on Joshua Zirkzee and the now departed Rasmus Højlund? So unfortunately, because of the volume of business incomings and outcomings, and because of some of the players that have stayed and others that have come in those positions, you have a lot of beginning of the summer, perhaps one plan, certain players feeling like they're going to be favoured by the manager, and then suddenly quite a big spend, quite a high volume of outgoings, and before you know it, you've got one or two players competing in the same position and the system isn't working. And I think all of that has maybe led towards a reset button or a restart, and there hasn't been much improvement or continuity from the back end of last season, and as a result, Manchester United are back where they started. So I think Amorim would probably argue that in 3-4 weeks, he can get everyone gelling, and the output from the new signings in particular will start to materialise, and that will make a big difference. Because if in every game either Cunha and Burmo or Sesko is contributing with either an assist or a goal, Manchester United can really get going. And that's probably the manager's argument, but we have to wait and see whether the hierarchy and to an extent the fan base agree.
Well, in terms of a contingency plan for INEOS and planning for the succession of Ruben Amorim if he does depart, if they do decide to sack him, or if in case he does walk away from the Manchester United job, you can't rule that out after how many times he said that vocally, that could be a potential. Where are Manchester United looking? I've seen multiple reports about Oliver Glasner, potentially even him turning down a new contract offer from Crystal Palace, with maybe a little eye on the fact that the Manchester United job might be available pretty soon. Where are they at in terms of that succession planning?
Yeah, it is succession planning, and maybe for those that are unfamiliar, it's different to interviewing or even shortlisting, but all well-run clubs, whether they like their manager or they don't, have to kind of have a list of candidates. So if a change is made, you're prepared. Otherwise, you're in a situation where you need an interim or you don't have a plan. And that's not just managers under threat, that's managers in demand as well. If your manager's doing very well, you have to start to think about who could you bring in to replace him. So I can guarantee you that Brighton will have a list of people in case someone comes in for Fabian Hürzeler. Crystal Palace have probably got a list of people in case Manchester United or another club come in for Oliver Glasner. And that is just what well-run clubs do. Otherwise, you're in a situation where you leave a void. And if that's in the middle of the season and you're the club that lose your manager, weeks could pass, or you could have to make a bit of a panic appointment. So Manchester United, I'm told, are succession planning. It doesn't mean any formal offers. It doesn't mean any front runners at this stage, but there are names on the list, and most of them have either managed in England or have got Premier League experience. One, as I've reported, is Gareth Southgate. He was a candidate before Ruben Amorim. And I think if they feel like culture has to be changed to get football results, that might be a name that they strongly consider. But he hasn't been in a club dugout for quite a lot of time. Then if it's the other way around and they think the results on the field will change the culture, you need somebody that obviously has a lot of current club managerial experience and ideally in the Premier League. And this is where Oliver Glasner and Andoni Iraola in particular come in. Some sources also add Marco Silva. One or two have told me Fabian Hertzler. But I think Iraola and Glasner, and if they go the other route, change the culture first, Gareth Southgate are the three that I'm hearing. Xavi is a free agent as well, but doesn't have Premier League experience. I think if there was a vacancy, they would likely sound him out. But my expectation, if Amorim goes, is that whoever comes in will have experience managing in England and very possibly managing currently in the Premier League, which means that two names they would seriously consider are Iraola, who has a release clause, and Oliver Glasner, who, as you say, has not committed to a new Crystal Palace deal. Palace fans don't like it when I say this. I reported last week that if Oliver Glasner was offered the Manchester United job, he would, to my knowledge, take it in a heartbeat. Now we've learned in the last 24, 48 hours that Glasner hasn't committed to a new Crystal Palace deal and wanted to see over the summer whether his side were backed in the market. So now I think is a really key point, because either Crystal Palace, in hopefully doing well in Europe and continuing this unbeaten run, are going to be able to tie him down, or if Manchester United were to make a change before that scenario happens, then my understanding is Glasner's head would be turned and he would be very open and very willing to join Manchester United if he was offered the job. And he will definitely be on the shortlist, I'm told, if Amorim departs. So there would be options. Many of them would either be available mid-season because they've got a release clause, or one or two are free agents. So I don't think Manchester United would be put off making a mid-season change because of the lack of calibre of candidates out there. And then there's some suggestion that Michael Carrick could be offered it again on an interim basis. I'm sort of steered away from that and told that were they to make a change, they would want someone permanent, they would want someone long-term, and they would want to bring stability to the football club rather than bringing somebody in until the end of the season and then reassessing their options in the summer. I don't think the optics of that either would sit well with the fan base.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to ask a little bit about that interim situation, because Glasner and Iraola are both on the list as Premier League experienced managers. I like both of them options. For me personally, I would probably be steering more to Oliver Glasner now, just because of certain things he's done over his career that makes me think maybe he could have a quicker impact at Manchester United. Iraola's got a brilliant style of football, but I question whether the squad would be up for his high pressing, high energy system, which is what he'd want to play straight away. So it'd be interesting to see which road Manchester United went down. But if they did want to change the manager, do you think that they would steer more towards permanency now and just paying the release clause of what they needed to do?
Yeah, I think so, just because if you're going to get rid of Ruben Amorim, and we should again stress that officially he still has the backing, but were they to make a mid-season change to bring in another interim, the reflection on INEOS of keeping Erik ten Hag, getting rid of Erik ten Hag, bringing Ruben Amorim in, sacking Ruben Amorim, bringing in an interim, and then perhaps not knowing who the manager might be until the following summer, would all suggest a bit of instability. And I don't think, as I said in the previous answer, the optics of that would sit well with the fan base. The only caveat is, could there be a scenario where you know who you want, you can get who you want, but they won't join until the end of the season. So you're forced to have an interim, but you already know who's coming in. And I think that would be the only scenario when an interim might be entertained, if they had a box office candidate and there was a sort of clear direction, but for whatever reason that manager said no. Amorim was forced to take it mid-season when he wanted it the following summer. It backfired. I'm not going to do the same. Maybe Manchester United would reconsider. And that's kind of what's interesting, particularly about Gareth Southgate. And it is only an if, of course, if they move in that direction. I know it's not the most popular of potential appointments with the fan base, but were they to go in that direction, I'd be surprised, out of all the candidates that we've mentioned, if Southgate would just dive straight in the middle of the season. I think if he was persuaded to take a job at Manchester United, it would far more likely only be next summer. So Manchester United would have to wait. Whereas I think with Iraola, there's a release clause. With Glasner, I do genuinely think that he would leave Crystal Palace if he was offered the role mid-season, even though they're on a fantastic run. It's a brilliant football club. They're playing in the Conference League this evening. They beat Liverpool at the weekend. Things are moving in the right direction there, but he's had to operate off a shoestring budget. And I'm still told that Glasner would be prepared to join Manchester United if a vacancy mid-season emerges. And then in terms of the fit, Glasner obviously is playing a back three. So actually, there is a scenario, like I said a few answers ago, where Ruben Amorim could actually leave and be right in his comments that the system is not the problem. Maybe he's just deemed, if he goes, as the wrong manager in what could still be the right system. So then if Glasner, who's a bit more flexible, comes in, you'd still have your back three. It's kind of a 3-4-2-1 with, if we look at the Liverpool game, Pino and Sarr, and then Mateta leading the line. There's heavy emphasis on Maynooth and Mitchell on either side. And you've got three very solid defenders, all of which are capable of moving into fullback positions if they need to cover, or squeezing in and creating a more uniform three. And in Richards, Lacroix and Guehi with Henderson behind, that's proved a very reliable back line. And because the two midfielders, Wharton and I think against Liverpool, it was probably Kamada, have got confidence in those three, they get a bit more license to push forwards and when needed, be box to box. So that kind of system could work for Manchester United, of course. But if it does, then ironically, if Ruben Amorim departs, he will have been right that there's nothing wrong with the back three or the system. He would just be deemed to be the wrong manager to get the best out of that system. Whereas maybe there's a feeling that Glasner could be a bit more tactically flexible.
Yeah, I mean, just off the back of that, we've Glasner at Crystal Palace, because I think you made some really good points there about his adaptability and being able to play his strengths, which is something that Manchester United fans are maybe getting a little bit frustrated with Ruben Amorim with the squad he's got. You've got to adapt a little bit, even if it's before you get your full set of players in. He's got that ability to adapt, Glasner. I mean, just looking at where he is now in Crystal Palace, I know that Adam Wharton has been a target of Manchester United's before. Is there a chance that that connection could potentially help Manchester United maybe go for that target next summer? Because we're not the most attractive club on paper right now in terms of being able to play in European competition and compete in the Premier League. But maybe having that connection and knowing Glasner might help Manchester United pitch to Adam Wharton, who I'm assuming is going to have quite a few clubs lining up for his signature.
Yeah, I don't think that's a factor. I also don't think we should necessarily be speculating over could a potential player under a potential manager come potentially to Manchester United when Glasner's not at Manchester United and Wharton is also still at Crystal Palace. And if you remember, Brian and Bruno only wanted Manchester United. So the pool was there, even though Tottenham liked the player and Thomas Frank moved to the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. So that's an example of the connection between Franken and Bruno and Frank and Wissa not resulting in either player joining Tottenham Hotspur. So I think Manchester United won't be overly thinking about can a manager lure a particular player. They'll be thinking about can European football and can the general stature of the club do that job. And the good news is that even with Manchester United at a relative rock bottom in recent times, Cunha wanted to come, Shesko wanted to come, and Mbumo wanted to come. So the pull is still there. If they can find the money, I don't actually think that they'll have too many concerns about being in the picture for a Baleba, a Wharton, a Stiller, or whatever other midfielder they choose to move for. And as I've said on previous shows, it might be two. The challenge is making sure after the players arrive, they feel that the reality lives up to the pitch. And that's what I mean about one or two new signings, perhaps being a bit more disillusioned that the club that they thought they were entering into, the system, the manager, the tactics, haven't quite lived up to the billing. And it's kind of unclear as to whether that's on the players, the manager, the culture. And I still think that because Jim Ratcliffe is relatively new in this Glazer-led organisation, there's a lot of people at the football club that are scratching their head because they're thinking, well, we have upgraded Carrington, we have changed the manager, we have spent over the summer, there was a feel-good factor. And yet all of these things haven't led to any kind of consistency yet on the field. So it's a little bit of a conundrum, I think. But regarding Adam Wharton, first of all, let's see whether he signs a new Crystal Palace deal, because I'm told that that is one possibility. Second of all, like with Cunha, does that deal have a release clause, which informs the market valuation? And then if there's not a new deal, I'm told there's kind of a gentleman's agreement that next summer, if Wharton doesn't sign a new deal, he can leave for somewhere in the region of 60 to 65 million pounds. And of course, if he does sign a new deal, you might find that the release clause is in or around that kind of number. So the Wharton future, still a little bit unclear. He could actually end up signing a new Crystal Palace deal. But I think from Manchester United's point of view, we know in 2026 that they'll be looking to make one, if not two, midfield additions. But players like Wharton, Baleba, Stiller, I think we'll be talking about clarity on their future, and if they may leave more in the summer. I'd be very surprised if Wharton, Baleba or Stiller ended up being January exits.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of being able to afford them transfer targets, I understand that we did bring in some money forward this summer to get the signings across the line of the Cunhas, the Mbumos, the Sescos in total of our summer business. But there's been a little bit of talk, Ben, about Manchester United potentially going playing midweek friendlies to get some money into the club and inject some cash into the football club that we can use. I mean, have you got any idea on what this could entail for Manchester United?
Yeah, so my understanding is that Manchester United have started initial and exploratory talks that were first broken by The Athletic. And these are around a mid-season friendly or friendlies abroad, with the Middle East one region of interest, and specifically Saudi Arabia. Now, you may remember in 2008, Manchester United went to Saudi Arabia for warm weather training in Riyadh. They were invited by the royal family. It was all paid for. They played and trained at the King Fahd Stadium, and they lost a game 3-2 to Al Hilal, which Wayne Rooney scored in. Flash forwards, and it's a similar kind of possibility. And what makes this, I think, a bit more concrete and viable is that one of the people who is driving this potential option is Manchester United's new chief business officer, Mark Armstrong, who was only appointed in February. And that's relevant because he was PSG's chief revenue officer at the time in January 2023. When PSG went to Saudi Arabia and basically played a Saudi all-star team in an exhibition match. So two things have been discussed, both falling under this so-called Riyadh season. And Riyadh season is a all-encompassing sport, entertainment, lifestyle festival that will have several events in entertainment, music, sports, art, culture. And usually it runs between now and about March, but we have to sort of wait for the final dates because I believe Ramadan in 2026 falls between mid-February and mid-March. And I don't know whether that will affect some of the events and maybe even prolong Riyadh season into April. So I'm told at the moment that there are these two options. One is Manchester United jet over and they play a Saudi Pro League 11, or two, as likely, that Manchester United participate in a mini football tournament called the Riyadh Season Cup, which has taken place before with Al Nassr and Al Hilal, the two Riyadh teams, and also Inter Miami. So effectively, Manchester United replace Inter Miami. They play Al Nassr and Al Hilal. From memory, it's not group stage into any kind of final. It's just everyone plays two games and whoever tops the group wins the trophy. And that's significant because it's not just paid money to play in the fixtures. There is prize money if you top the group as well. So a one-off fixture for Manchester United historically, they've been asking for up to 2 million, but I'm told that Saudi would be prepared to pay closer to 5 million. So if it is therefore the Riyadh Season Cup, you would be looking at two fixtures against Cristiano Ronaldo's Al Nassr and Al Hilal, plus prize money, plus flights and training facilities all covered. So it could actually be worth for Manchester United between 12 and 15 million pounds with nothing to pay. And they would use it as warm weather training as well. So you can understand why there is some appeal over having these exploratory conversations. But at the moment, there's still no guarantee a fixture happens. And the reason for that is because the Saudi preference is to play a fixture, a showpiece football game, whether Manchester United or another team, in the late November and early December period, because at that stage, Saudi Pro League sides have a little break in their calendar. But if you line that up with Manchester United's fixtures, I believe they've got matches against Everton, Crystal Palace, Wolves and Bournemouth. So it feels very difficult to think that Manchester United would be able to fulfill certainly 2 games in that same period. Otherwise, you're jumping usually to mid or late January or even potentially early February. And that is when the Riyadh Season Cup has taken place historically. So I think if this happens, we're either looking at late November, but that's very difficult because it's a congested period for Manchester United, or possibly mid-late January or early February. And then obviously we'd have to factor in when Ramadan starts as well, which might complicate the dates as well. So it's not actually easy to find a date that suits both the Saudi Pro League clubs, the Ministry of Sport, the General Entertainment Authority and Manchester United, but talks are currently ongoing. But what I would say is they're only initial or exploratory at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, it would be interesting. I know a lot of people will kind of look down on this and say, well, why are Manchester United playing midweek friendlies when we should be in Europe, etc. There's always going to be them sort of comments, but at this moment in time, we're not in Europe. I think it'd be good to use it as warm weather training. I think if you're earning money from it, then why not? I see it as a positive. I mean, Manchester United are training midweek anyway. They're only training against the squad that they currently have. Why not go and train somewhere and go and get some money in for it? I'm for that personally, but obviously we'll have to see how it develops, because that, like you said, that pre-Christmas period and Christmas period can be quite busy for Manchester United. So let's see if we do end up having some games over in Riyadh. It'd be good to see, I think, but let's see how it turns out. Sian says, bring in a manager who doesn't want to come mid-season. Don't give him the right players to fulfil it this season. Sack him based on results from last season, ? Well, it's an interesting one, that, Ben, because there is a bit of confusion for you fans whether Amorim was fully backed in the summer, whether he was on board with the decision-making of the positions we went and got and the players for them. To your knowledge, was it?
Well, yes, in the sense that he asked for 2 10s, he got 2 10s. He was fully behind Sané Lammens, and in addition, he wanted a number 9, and Manchester United were always going to sign a number 9, and Benjamin Sesko arrived. Was all of his choices or opinions signed? No. But that's the difference in the recruitment model, that Erik ten Hag had a veto, whereas Ruben Amorim doesn't, because it's a more collaborative recruitment model. And I've said many times that just because Amorim doesn't get a player he wants, that's not a negative, it's a positive, because you need a recruitment model where there is freedom to challenge and where there is a healthy debate. Otherwise, if everything's just on the whim of either what the manager wants or what the recruitment head wants, you get a lot of yes people and you don't have a genuine debate. So you always almost want somebody that's unhappy that put forward another name, because that shows you that the model has genuine freedom to challenge to get you to the best possible decision-making process. But as I've said many times, Amorim's perspective in the meetings was to push Premier League experience. He was in favour of the loan for Emi Martinez, but it got dismissed very quickly by Aston Villa, and then he was too expensive on deadline day compared to Sané Lammens. He was in favour of Ollie Watkins, but Christopher Vivell convinced the recruitment team, including the manager, it has to be said, that Benjamin Sesko is the right choice. So Amorim, in many ways, put forward one name, and that name tended to have Premier League experience, but in some instances changed his mind. And I think why he changed his mind specifically with Watkins was because Cunha and Mbeumo had already arrived. So the feeling was that Benjamin Sesko would offer a higher ceiling, more longevity and a lower wage, and give Manchester United more bang for their buck over a longer period in time. If Cunha and Mbeumo hadn't been signed, or even if only one of them had arrived, I think there's a very realistic chance that all of Manchester United's recruitment team may have said we're better served bidding for Ollie Watkins. So things kind of changed throughout the window, based on the level of Premier League experience, particularly on the front line that arrived. And Ruben Amorim made his case, an argument. He's very forthright. He's very concise. He's very honest and open. You may remember the interview where Jim Ratcliffe says sometimes he calls up Amorim and Amorim just goes F off. So they're not afraid to speak their mind. And I think that's a really key thing to understand, because if Ruben Amorim wanted something in the summer, he will have said it, and he will have said it vocally, and they will have debated it. And then either Amorim will have got his way, Cunha and Burmo, or Christopher Vivell and Jason Wilcox would have persuaded him that what was better served was other names for the now and the long term, like Benjamin Sesko and Sene Lammens. So the only real two areas where Amorim didn't get a revamp was a new fullback and a central midfielder. And now we have to wait and see whether that comes to bite Manchester United, because ultimately it very much looks like they need, in particular, another athletic, deeper lying central midfielder. And without one, Amorim may argue that his system is hampered.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to ask, do you think Amorim is happy with his squad?
I think he's happy with the squad, because I think in a season without any form of European football, to spend what Manchester United spent, and as importantly, have the level of outgoings that Amorim felt were necessary, does add some stability, particularly across the front line. I think Amorim is very happy with his attack-minded options. Now Cunha and Burmo and Sesko have arrived. I think he's pleased that the Rashford situation is resolved, and the same for Alejandro Garnacho, because that was a plough over much of the summer that sort of needed clearing to allow Ruben Amorim to focus on the players that he felt were part of Manchester United's future, and not have big wages, big personalities, big egos still on the books. There's no right and wrong here. We have to be fair to the player side as well. But most managers, when you have a big name that makes big headlines on a big wage and can't find a move away, will be really adamant they don't want to be left with the window shut and those players still be there. So Rashford, Garnacho, Sancho in particular, and to a lesser extent Antony, were equally as big for Ruben Amorim to not have to be the manager dealing with that and dealing with the media and dealing with the headlines. So I think relatively content with the summer and the backing, but still needing that central midfielder. And whether or not in a season without any European football and with budgets and PSR positions being relatively tight, you can expect that 60 to 100 million midfielder and that 20 to 40 million fullback. I'm not so sure that Manchester United had that financial capability. So it was probably a trade-off. And I think Amorim, in hindsight, may just have to accept that if he got his 2 10s and striker, it was always going to be quite difficult to fund a central midfielder and a fullback and an experienced goalkeeper in addition. But maybe one of those three, Amorim would argue, is lacking. And I'm sure if he had to pick, he would be saying that right now he needs another person in the centre of the park.
Do you think, in terms of the experienced goalkeeper, we ended up getting Sene Lammens' potential for the future? Do you think he's got a chance of coming in anytime soon, especially with increased scrutiny on Altay Binder?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've said many times that Sene Lammens was brought in for game time and to be the number one. It's just a case of how long that acclimatisation takes. And I don't think they would have sanctioned the Onana straight loan unless they were confident that Sene Lammens, between now and before the festive period begins, can assume the number one role at Manchester United. And that's my expectation. Whether it's Sunderland or whether it's after the international break remains to be seen. But I do think that it's very clear that Sene Lammens, after he's had time to get up to speed, will be ahead of Binder in the pecking order. And that was said to the player. That doesn't mean he's the long-term number one that they're going to stick with no goalkeeper arriving in 2026. But it means that he'll get games between now and the end of the year to prove what he can do as number one. And if he does well, he'll obviously hold that position. If it's felt that he needs a little bit more time and development, having thrown him at the deep end between now and the end of the year, then that may inform what Manchester United do on the goalkeeper front, either in January or summer 2026. But either way, some form of new goalkeeper, I'm told, will arrive in 2026, simply because Onana seems done at the club, even though it's only a straight loan. If Lammens holds the spot, then Binder might leave, so you still need another goalkeeper. If Lammens doesn't hold the spot, then you're looking back at Emi Martinez or even someone like a Mike Maignan who's available on a free transfer in summer 2026.
Well, that might be something to ask Amorim in his press conference tomorrow regarding the keeper situation. Sometimes he does reveal them details in his press conference. And we will be reacting to Ruben Amorim's press conference tomorrow. So make sure you stay tuned tomorrow afternoon. Sunderland press conference. We'll be reacting to Amorim's live thoughts and comments. Ben, just to kind of move into the last little bit of the show here, thank you so much. Some really valuable insight as per usual. Love to get into all the Manchester United details. I wanted to ask you about Tyrell Malacia's reintegration. How did it come about? Is there any details on why he was reintegrated into the first team squad?
I just think it's Ruben Amorim is very firm but fair with all players. And if he gets encouragement that somebody can be reintegrated and be valuable, he's not afraid to do that. And part of that is he doesn't have a veto in recruitment, but he very much has a veto around Carrington. So nobody within the ownership or the sporting team can kind of stop that reintegration if the manager thinks that it's the right decision. So as you sort of said in your question, he was out, he was in the bomb squad, he was training separately with Rashford, Garnacho, Sancho and Anthony. And in the summer, he was surplus to requirements. But in being put in that bomb squad, I was told at the time that he reacted very positively. He was super professional and he wasn't sort of sulking. He was training hard. And that feedback's kind of filtered back up to Amorim, who's decided to give him another chance. And club sources are kind of clear here that Malacia's reintegration is not about the poor starts of the season or even injuries to other players. It's simply down to the fact that he's trained very hard when in a very difficult position. And now that move hasn't happened, that positive feedback has gone back up to Amorim. So he's decided to give him another chance. And we wait and see whether that's short term, whether that's minutes within the Premier League, or whether come January, he's back down into a bomb squad and still ends up leaving the football club. But this is an example of Ruben Amorim taking control, using a kind of authority or his veto on the training field and saying, well, if he's still there and he's training positively and he's being professional, why not give him another opportunity? And that's exactly what's happened.
And lastly, Mainoo, is there any updates on his potential contract? Is he looking to sign one still? Is there any movement on agreements with the contract?
Well, I think Mainoo wants to wait until January to see once again what kind of opportunities he's going to get. And then we're in a really key stage because he's heading 6 months before the World Cup. And it's very possible if Mainoo doesn't see any change, he's going to ask Manchester United exactly the same question in January. Can I go out somewhere on loan? Can I get minutes between now and the World Cup? But you may note a pattern here that Mainoo consistently has said to Manchester United in the summer and very possibly in the next few weeks or months, I don't want to go permanently, but I want minutes. So the player doesn't want to leave Manchester United. He wants it to work. And you can also understand why, if there's a question mark over the future of Ruben Amorim, Mainoo may feel that his situation could change very dramatically and very positively in terms of minutes under any new potential manager if a change has been made as well. So that kind of makes it the wrong time to speak to the player about a new deal. And the reason why I say Mainoo's only ever asked for a loan is because Manchester United will know they can use that to their advantage. They've got a player that ideally wants to stay, so there's perhaps a bit less urgency about tying him down now. And I think all parties want to wait and see how it goes between now and when the January window opens. And then the picture will be clearer as to whether Mainoo's going to get his wish to go out and play minutes, as to whether Mainoo's going to get minutes at Manchester United. And then from there, it will be more obvious as well what will happen in the summer. Because if there's no sign of improvement, if there's no sign of system fit, and if there's no sign of consistent starts or minutes for Mainoo, then by the post-World Cup period, it becomes very likely that he changes this "I only want a loan" to "I begrudgingly might have to leave the football club." And as I've said on previous shows, that's kind of what happened to Mason Mount, where he was desperate to sign a new Chelsea contract for months and months and months. They couldn't reach an agreement. And then eventually he realised the only way he was going to get the starts and the minutes and the football he was looking for was to leave Stamford Bridge, ultimately for Manchester United. So I think it's still quite a fluid and open situation with Kobbie Mainoo, but don't be surprised in the next month or two if clubs start to come to Manchester United and ask if they've changed their mind on a loan, because there's lots of interest. Napoli during the summer, Newcastle United historically as well. They might be in the market for another midfielder in 2026, whether January or the summer. So we're probably going to have to wait a few more weeks. But at this stage, there's no new progress. There's nothing developing yet around Mainoo and a new deal, but Mainoo's position hasn't changed. He wants the minutes, whether at Manchester United or elsewhere, but he's not agitating to leave the football club because he remains in love with Manchester United, which means if we get to the point where United do offer him a new deal, then Mainoo's very open to engaging on that and staying. But there's only so long that you can keep staying at a football club if that football club is not giving you regular opportunities on the field. And let's see what happens against Sunderland, because it feels like the kind of game that might be a chance to give Mainoo a bit of a boost and some minutes ahead of the international break.
Yeah, I really, really hope that Mainoo does stay. I hope he signs a new contract. I hope he starts getting more minutes. And that's another area where I'm doubting Ruben Amorim in terms of the way that he decides who's going to play and the minutes that are dished out. I don't know if he's getting the best out of the players, but also I don't know if he's necessarily picking the best players to play in these games and get the majority of the game time. So that's another thing to watch out for, but hopefully we do get some positive news regarding Kobbie Mainoo pretty soon. And I'd love to see him start against Sunderland, Ben. I just don't think he will, but let's see. The Footballing Insights has said, what's the feeling from the United board around Ruben Amorim's man management, and are the players content with his man management? We spoke a little bit about the players' thoughts on Amorim, but is there anything regarding the man management that we can answer there, Ben?
Well, I think the management of Manchester United have empowered Ruben Amorim to have authority at Carrington, so less authority compared to Erik ten Hag in the market with recruitment, but more autonomy and authority as far as decision-making. And it's Amorim that was driving Antony and Rashford and Sancho and Garnacho out. There was nothing from the hierarchy to say to Ruben Amorim, should you reconsider? And as I said in my last answer, it was Amorim deciding to reintegrate Malacia, and the hierarchy are perfectly comfortable with that, even though he may still be in the shop window in 2026. So I don't think anyone at Manchester United within the leadership has any issues with Ruben Amorim off the field. His honesty and candour is refreshing. He wears his heart on his sleeve. He's very clear with the players, and none of that, as far as I'm aware, is a problem or an issue. The challenge is, how does he translate that into results on the field? And it doesn't matter whether he's liked, and it doesn't matter whether his style is needed to change the culture at Carrington. If he gets those small wins off the field in a clear out, in the players acting in a different manner, in a different vibe in the dressing room, in a different kind of man management, over time, none of that will matter if you can't translate it into results. So the hierarchy are more concerned about, can Ruben Amorim get the results, but less concerned, from what I'm told, about his personality, about his demeanour, and about he's actually reacting to and managing and mentoring the players off the field, because they knew exactly what they were in for. I've told this story before. Ruben Amorim at Sporting came in. Islam Slimani, former Leicester City striker, returned to Sporting, club legend at Sporting, and pretty much on day one, Amorim said, he's playing in the reserves because I don't want him. I'm not going to give him a chance. I don't care if he's a club legend. And the Sporting president, much like the Manchester United hierarchy are doing for Amorim, said, okay, if that's your decision, that's your decision. It was firm. It was, some said fair, some said harsh, but it was clear. And it was to the player's face. So there was no sort of, have I fallen out with the manager? Do I know what the manager really thinks of me? What's the problem? And this is why I think the dressing room still, to a large extent, support Ruben Amorim, because whether they think he's being fair or unfair or firm or soft, they know where they stand, because he's not the kind of manager to shut the door. He's not the kind of manager to tell you something through a covert message or behind your back. If he's got a problem with you, it's to your face. If he likes you, it's to your face. If you're not playing, the explanation is to your face and clear. So there is still that respect, because the players, even though they're not succeeding at the moment, do, I'm told, know exactly where they stand with this manager.
Yeah, and I like that. I think if I was a player, that's exactly what I'd want. You want someone that's got a strong hand, because that's how you're going to perform at your best. But honesty is so important. So hopefully, I mean, I really hope that things can turn around. But there is always going to be a lot of nitpicking and negative stories, especially when you're not doing well at the biggest club in the world. So it's going to be interesting to see how Manchester United get on against Sunderland, and if there is again another poor result and God forbid a loss, how the Manchester United board react to that. But Ben, thank you so much for all of your brilliant insights as per usual. I've really enjoyed listening to you, and I'm sure the majority, if not all, of our viewers have absolutely loved it as well. I would be shocked if it wasn't all.
I don't know about that. We shouldn't be saying glowing 100% endorsement, but it's always a pleasure coming on. And like I say, I think the next few games are really key, because we're going to get to a point where we can make a league table over 38 Premier League games. And at that point, I think we're either going to see a corner turned, and then hopefully that backing for Amorim continues, or they're going to move backwards. And then I think as we approach the festive period, it's going to be very difficult for Ruben Amorim. But again, officially, Manchester United back Ruben Amorim, but sources I speak to are still suggesting this notion that he's blanket safe until the end of the season, because Ratcliffe wants to give him game 1 of this season until game 38. I'm told that that is not the case, and if results don't turn around soon, then Ruben Amorim could be in big trouble.
Well, you heard it here, guys. You heard it here from B&B on the B&B show. We still need to get that into motion, Ben. But look, everyone, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you smash a like on the video. And also, remember, straight after this stream, you're going to be redirected to Goldbridge's Bundesliga Matchday 5 highlight show live. You don't want to miss that. So stay tuned. You'll go straight over to that. And on top of that as well, tomorrow night, we have live Bundesliga footage, a live game. Mark will be watching it. You can watch it as well. Make sure you stay tuned for that. And of course, we have all the build-up to a really pivotal game for Ruben Amorim and Manchester United before the international break. Sunderland at home at Old Trafford. It's a big one. It's a big one, everyone. So stay tuned for all the matchday content coming for that. But look, Ben, thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next week.
Look forward to it.